Hello, welcome to the fourth session of Mutual Aid 101. My name is Tom Llewellyn, and I'm with Shareable, the organization that's hosting tonight's event and the entire Mutual Aid 101 series. Want to thank everyone for joining us for this entire series. We will be having one more office hour next week, and then we will be having an offers and needs market, which we'll talk a little bit more at the end of tonight's session, as well as sending an invite out for that as well. Tonight, we are fortunate to have a series of short presentations from 5 speakers that will be discussing a number of different aspects of mutual aid or venues for participating in mutual aid. For our first presentation, we are fortunate to have Sanae from the Metro Atlanta Mutual Aid Fund.
I'm very excited and happy to be here with y'all. So to start off, my name is Sanae Alaoui. I am a community organizer and creative based here in Atlanta with my roots and origins coming from Morocco. I am a collective member of the Metro Atlanta Mutual Aid Fund, and I'm also one of the program coordinators of the fund. I'm very excited to start off by sharing the story of MAMA Fund with you. MAMA Fund started off as a 2020 Facebook group that was a response to the COVID-19 pandemic, where people would share stuff about like resisting evictions or just finding resources and generally like a way to commune. And one of the members of this Facebook group, Tamika Middleton, who is a long-term Black organizer in the South, came up with this idea that there should be some sort of monetary and non-monetary mutual aid organization, more solidified organization around that. So as you can see, there's the screenshot there of the post that she made back in 2020. And from there, essentially, MAMA Fund was born out of a group of 12 BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color organizers and non-organizers, volunteer members. And essentially, this group and the work that MAMA Fund did was able to form so quickly because we got guidance and a fiscal sponsorship from the Organization for Human Rights and Democracy, which is a group who's been doing solidarity economy work in Atlanta for about a decade now, or building out the solidarity economy. From 2020 to 2024, about 4 years, we raised $1 million, and 60% of these donations were less than $2,000, which means a lot of people gave a little or gave what they can. So there was a lot of grassroots funding of this in the sense of like true mutual aid. There was a lot of individuals and people giving to other individuals and people. And we did get larger donations as well from foundations and even companies at the time. But one thing that's unique about our funding model is that we have a funding requirements flowchart, and we don't accept funding from, we have different criteria that filters out certain kinds of funding. So funding from large companies that have a negative impact in the communities that they work in, or if their amount that they were giving is just abysmally small compared to what their actual budget is. For example, Amazon, I think, offered us a very small amount compared to what their budget is. And we essentially said, no, you can give that to your workers. It's not. So in this mutual aid model, it's both individual people giving and also recreating the relationship and dynamic with receiving funding and how we hold people accountable to funders and redistribution of wealth. And so over those 4 years, we gave out more than 800,000 to BIPOC parents, queer people, unemployed people, formerly incarcerated people, friends, family, and community. In total, we gave out this money to about 3,000 people, and we did not have certain traditional barriers that a lot of like service-based nonprofits have, where you have to prove your need. It was based on honesty and trust. If people say that what they need, we give it to them. And also, there is no limit to what can be requested. People don't always get 100% of their need met, but they can state, this is what I actually need. And then 2 staff members were hired in August to support the work, because most of this work had been being done by volunteer members, and I was one of them. Basing a little bit more in like what is the ethos and the values of the MAMA Fund. MAMA Fund is made up of long-term Atlanta organizers as well as people who are completely new to organizing, but wanted to participate in mutual aid. And the core of MAMA Fund has always been a rapid response now and alternative systems for our future. And what does this mean? This essentially means that we are building an infrastructure for a post-capitalist future rooted in radical queer Black feminism, while simultaneously recognizing that there is a great need for funds right now, currently. So we're doing work in the future world that we imagine, and also providing monetary mutual aid for the current world we exist in. And this often means that while we started off with monetary mutual aid, we eventually wanted to move into non-monetary mutual aid as part of building a larger solidarity economy. And so in 2024, last year, we finally started getting to transition to this work of doing non-monetary mutual aid, and namely that is through a time bank. While we still, like I said, are doing both, essentially rapid response now. People need funds now for rent and things like that. We also wanted to build out a sustainable infrastructure and ways that people can meet each other's needs and build robust relationship networks through sharing with each other through non-monetary mutual aid. So we were able to hire someone who was one of the volunteer organizers to be the time bank and membership organizer and start building out the time bank in 2024. So we've just started, and our goal is to have 500 time bank users in the time bank, with about 60% of those users actively using the time bank as a place to meet our needs by the end of 2025. I'm going to speak a little bit more in the breakout room about what it's like to transition from being a primarily monetary based mutual aid group to really trying to focus on non-monetary mutual aid and some of the triumphs and challenges around that. But mainly the biggest thing is that we've had to reduce a lot of the amounts that we give out because we found it's not always sustainable. And also the amounts that were raised in 2020 versus now, the amount that's being given is very different. But if you are local in Atlanta and you identify as BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, person of color, please consider joining our time bank and participating in this, building out this non-monetary mutual aid system.
All right. Thank you so much, Sanae, for starting us off. Our next session, our next presentation, rather, I should say, is going to feature Alexa Baiano and Rain of Mutual Aid Disaster Relief.
My name is Alexa. I use they and she pronouns. I am part of Mutual Aid Disaster Relief. I'm currently based in Arizona.
Hey, y'all. This is Rain. It's they, them, she, her, it's fine. I'm in the Gulf South.
Cool. Thanks, Rain. So Mutual Aid Disaster Relief is a grassroots network that is based in solidarity and mutual aid. It started during the times of Katrina in New Orleans. It was born out of like intense need that was not being met by the state or by any infrastructures that were supposed to be set up to provide relief and support to those who were affected by the storm. So neighbors and people who like had some resources to share got together and created this big network that we see today. And that was maybe 10 years ago. I have a weird timeline of things, so a while ago. And yeah, it's an approach also to disaster response that is specifically focuses on community-led responses. So the idea that a person who is in need has the best opinion of how to get that need met, or knows the best on how to meet that need. We have a few like specific lenses that we like to operate through and try to uphold when we're responding. Specifically, Matter or Mutual Aid Disaster Relief is not like a deploy group. We don't like go to a disaster when it happens necessarily. It's a network that connects all of these on the ground efforts together and helps redistribute resources, shares information. Also, many of us involved are on the ground in these disaster areas. So we are actively responding as well, but it's not a like army that gets sent into a disaster zone in the way FEMA or the Red Cross is. Like I said, it's community led. We have a pillar that we call solidarity, not charity. Often a charity model requires some sort of power dynamic. It requires some sort of patronizing idea of how something can be mitigated or responded to. And instead, we like to use the lens of solidarity. And we'll talk more about this in our breakout group. But churches and the state and other nonprofits often operate with a charity model, and it takes away power from those who actually are in need in that moment. It moves the center point away from the people who actually need the care. Another pillar that we stand on is shared resources. A huge part of the projects that we work on now are about how we can move these resources around, how we can make them available, be prepared with them, and share them when things go wrong. And another pillar that we stand on is long-term commitment. We recognize that many of these disasters are not by accident or not natural. And so building infrastructure and building networks of solidarity, even when there isn't necessarily a disaster, can help mitigate that harm when it does happen. But also a lot of the state or FEMA or the official infrastructures that are set up to respond to these disasters, they leave quite quickly after a hurricane, and there's much more harm or destruction that needs care in the long term.
I would say that I think since we're on the mission and vision and values, a big part of, we are all volunteer, like nobody gets paid within our network. So we all work at the capacity that we can. And when some folks are burnt out, other folks step up, and it's a really fluid and autonomous network. But it's, somebody asked in the chat if there's someone that connects mutual aid groups. And I wouldn't say that's our job or our like goal, but it's what we are also. Like it says under the image, right? We're a network. We're not like this group that comes in and does a thing. We're supporting local autonomous grassroots groups. And we'll get onto that in the next slide with some of the projects that are coming up. But it's really lovely how folks are able to really share the load and also the learning. There's been a lot of lessons learned since Katrina, and we try to share that information on our website, which it has a ton of resources and highly recommend.
I want to add on to what you said and to like re-emphasize these pillars, and that this was born out of people's need and getting their needs met with each other, and continues to be that. So there isn't a like matter that exists outside of people who are affected by these disasters. We are the ones affected, and we are the ones responding, and it's this like cyclical thing.
That's one of the things that is one of our lessons learned, is really because it is so decentralized. Sometimes when folks do join into the network, it can be confusing about how to navigate. But there's a few different ways that folks plug in. A lot of times it is because they are the folks that are impacted, and they are the folks that are responding and building that capacity on the ground because they're not having their needs met, just like in Katrina, just like in East Kentucky right now, just like in Helene. So there's just so many examples in which the state is not able and other agencies are not able to support the need, and people are the ones that do that. So one of the ways folks plug in, like I said, is on the ground. The other way is sometimes folks will just hear about us or know somebody that has worked with us, and us, again, being a very loose word here because we hive mind everywhere, but somebody will just send us an email and we'll send out some questions to get a feel about values, because that's really important to us. We want to make sure we're protecting those folks on the ground that we are working with. We know how the climate can be sometimes, and so we want to make sure we're protecting vulnerable persons that are already more vulnerable because of the situation. And so we'll send out some questions and ask for some references and just check in with folks. But other than that, once folks plug in, there's a ton of different projects, which you can see in this awesome table on the right, that we work within. These are some of our survival programs, which y'all can check out on the website as well. There's a ton of resources also for DIY response, medics, etc. Also like wellness and self-wellness, because this is a traumatizing gig that we do, what we are committing to. So some of the things that are going on survival program Rise, like right now, and continuing on, if y'all check our social medias, we're always reposting the pages and the responses that are happening on the ground from the smaller groups that are within the network, right? So Helene, There was a switchboard that got formed that was dispatching needs to different groups that were also local right now in East Kentucky. And there's the folks that still are there responding. Alexa was dope and got an ATV figured out for helping recon and respond. That was awesome. Just saying, throw that in there. Also, folks are doing like muck and gut right now. So under our Rebuilding a Better World program, we do a lot of crew dispatch. We're working on tool libraries and just ready response in different areas right now. Folks are starting to discuss how that's so important so that folks are able to get on the ground immediately with chainsaws, with removing large debris, with getting people's houses mucked and gut before the mold takes over. Our supplies distribution program is working on supply lines connecting a lot of the regions in which we've responded. So we've been working with the fires along the West Coast for a few years now. And in the most recent response with LA, there were a lot more connections formed. So that's looking really wonderful. The connectivity on the West Coast that's forming. Also within the Northeast, Vermont and New Hampshire have gotten hit with floods a few times now. So they're also starting to pre-position. Also, they're addressing like infectious diseases up in the North because they have such a closed interior, like indoor environment. So they've had some high numbers that they're concerned about. The Gulf South along the entire West to East Coast, we've got different areas that have built out over multiple responses. So we work with Distribute Aid on occasion to source out larger supplies that we're going to start pre-positioning. Our wellness program is really complex. Alexa, do you want to talk about that real quick?
I will talk about it quickly as how it fits into our model. We have an autonomous and horizontally structured FDA medical device production group. So we horizontally organize to create medical devices like tourniquets that can then be distributed.
And to clarify, that is not a matter specific program. It is a program that we support, but it's also like not us, quote unquote. I just want to be clear about that. It is a program that we support. It's like here with our table because we support, but that's the stuff that we try to do as far as building capacity and infrastructure. We do pop-up clinics a lot of time during response. That was really happening in Helene recently. And then recently in the fire response and in the Northeast, they've been building the Corsi Rosenthal filters with community and teaching folks more about the air quality.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Next, I want to invite Valinda Chan to come in from Mutual Aid Eastie.
Hello, everyone. How are you? So we started Mutual Aid Eastie back in March 2020 when the pandemic started as a way to provide rapid response efforts during the pandemic. So there have already been a lot of different problems happening in our community before the pandemic, but the pandemic really exacerbated a lot of the challenges that we were having. So this in response to that. And then over time, we shifted from that rapid response work and doing emergency aid to building more longer term relationship building and community care. So in the beginning, the team was absolutely amazing in rapid response, figuring out, responding to food insecurity, COVID vaccines, et cetera. But over time, we've realized that for our work to be sustainable and to really adapt to what the community needs right now, we've shifted our mission to focus more on creating community spaces, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So today we currently have a network of more than 240 community members and neighbors. All right, so our team right now, we have a core team who runs the day-to-day. So even though we're non-organization, we've learned through our years of doing this work is that we really need to prioritize economic justice and to make sure that this work stays sustainable. So our model is a little bit different, but it is what works in our community and for us as neighbors and community members. So we have a little different types of community spaces. We have our reciprocity circles where we encourage abundance sharing. We encourage folks who have different skills and abundances like the time and talents to share with each other and support each other. So we have one example of this is our language exchange. We've seen a lot of neighbors have been on wait lists for English classes for a very long time. And there are English classes, but they might not be accessible to their schedules, to their working hours. But in the meantime, we've also had a lot of neighbors in our network who are very fluent in Spanish as well, and folks who speak perfect English and want to be able to learn Spanish. So that is one way that we wanted to launch that language exchange so that we can connect those needs and those abundances with neighbors. So we can really see each human being as people with both needs and abundances to share. So that's one example, but we have other different types of circles as well, like our Manualidades circle. So that's a craft circle where neighbors come together and they craft and they spend time with each other in community and support each other emotionally. But we have other types of reciprocity circles as well. Another type of community space that we offer is really focused on resource sharing. So if you see here on the upper right, this is our little free pantry that's right outside our office. And we've had a collaboration with Shareable, and we've been having this space as a way for neighbors to physically share different, whether it's food, whether it's books, different types of items that they might want to share and drop off or pick up as a way for them to also exchange abundances and needs as well. And we have other community spaces like our office hours every week, where it's like a third space, third place for our community where neighbors can come together, come in for coffee. There's pastries, cafecito, pan dulce. So, and then like people could just coexist together and get to know each other. And then we have neighbor meetings as well, where it's spaces for neighbors to get to know each other as community members, be able to share different priorities or challenges or issues and support each other and build community and solidarity that way. So looking forward in terms of what we're hoping to do next. So as we continue to strengthen the work that we're doing, we're really looking forward to figuring out how do we make our work even more sustainable? How do we strengthen that? How do we make it possible for our neighbors to self-organize more and really facilitate more abundance sharing with each other? So we're really looking forward to figuring out what that model could look like for our solidarity economy, really looking forward to engaging more neighbors and sharing and living the joy of mutual aid. But if you're interested in the work that we do or you want to hear more, definitely feel free to follow us on social media and check out our website. So with that, thank you for being here, and I'll pass it back to you, Tom.
Great. Thank you, Valinda. We have Laurie Roberts from the Mississippi Reproductive Freedom Fund.
That's me, Laurie Bertram Roberts from the Mississippi Reproductive Freedom Fund. We are based in Jackson, Mississippi, specifically a neighborhood called Washington Addition. That's where most of our work tends to happen. We were founded in 2013 as an abortion fund that was rooted in reproductive justice. So if you're not familiar with the reproductive justice framework, it's the right to parent, the right not to parent, and the right to parent in safe and secure communities with all your basic needs met. So we always knew that we didn't only want to fund abortion, but we wanted to show up for people's everyday parenting needs, food needs, and disrupt harmful systems with mutual aid as much as we can. So what that looks like for us right now is that we have a little free library, our little free library and pantry that we've had since 2017. We have multiple properties that we're working on fixing up so that we can utilize those for the community. We obviously still fund abortion care. We do what's called practical support more than anything, which is helping people with all of the problems outside of getting your actual appointment. So rides, information about how to do self-managed abortion doulas, childcare, food money, plane tickets, train tickets, that kind of stuff. We have a lending library that's very heavy on organizing information. And we also are hoping to upgrade our pantry with a with a fridge this year. That's my big goal, is that we get a community fridge finally. But we actually have some problems with our property with it flooding. So it's gonna be a minute. But our other goal is to have a free vending machine for emergency contraception, because we give away free emergency contraception, we give away condoms, safer sex supplies, cleaning supplies. Like, we basically, if there's a need that you present to us and we can fill it, we fill it. We try to meet folks where they are. We try to make sure that we're available for our seniors in Washington Edition to mow their yards and make sure they have things like adult diapers if they need them, or period supplies, or people who are parenting have diapers. We have all of that. So yeah, that's pretty much who we are. The thing I'm most proud of, I would say, is that we have managed to disrupt the child protection services by making sure that people, like if someone calls us and says, hey, CPS was coming to my house, or they came to my house and they said we need beds, we need this, we need that, then we come in and try to secure all of those things. And also if someone needs help cleaning or they need rides to the store, that kind of stuff, so that they can keep their kids and keep families together, versus shuttling, which we're in Jackson, it's 80% Black, shuttling children who look like my children and I into the system. And I'll just leave it there.
All right, thank you for that. And there was a link in the chat. Laurie was featured in a two-part audio documentary that we produced as part of the Response podcast about reproductive justice and abortion access in the Southeast in a post-Dobbs world. All right, our fifth and final speaker for this part of the evening is Vicki Osterweil, who is a writer, organizer, and agitator based in the so-called Philadelphia. She is a member of the new anarchist media collective, CAW, which is in soft launch at cawshinythings.com.
Hi everybody. Yeah, it's caw. I didn't like a crow's. It's Corvid themed. Sorry for not prompting you on that. Okay, so as you can maybe see from the title, I'm going to be talking from the perspective of projects that I might or might not work on, but which it's not really easy to talk about in public. These are projects around trans and queer health, but also reproductive health and abortion care in this moment, and also just generalized health care. Because I can't really talk about some of this stuff, I'm going to be talking about historical examples as a way of thinking tactically and strategically about the importance of mutual aid across the history of like revolt in the US. And I'm gonna do it really fast too, don't worry. And then I'm gonna bring some of that into the struggles that we're doing today. And then I'll get more into the nitty gritty in the working group. But before I say, I wanted to start by saying that like, although I'm talking about the underground and I get to use the skeleton meme and like do the be gay, do crime joke or whatever, the distinction between underground and above ground work, especially when it comes to mutual aid, is not really dictated by us. It's dictated by the state. So if the groups that I'm referring to were to describe their work, it would look a lot moment to moment like the work everyone else here has already described, right? But the object of that work happens to be made illegal right now by the fascists in control of the state, right? And you can sort of see that there's nothing more glamorous or like central or important about underground work by the way that stuff like Food Not Bombs, or groups like it, these are very long-standing anarchist mutual aid groups that just give out food to people in parks. And when they get too powerful, they will be made illegal. For an example, in 2021 to 2022, in Asheville, North Carolina, during a really big gentrification push, as they were trying to like really gentrify the town post-COVID and accelerate the tourism, the city introduced an ordinance banning the sharing of food in public. And a group that had been feeding homeless folks in a park, which they've been doing for years, were given conviction, were charged with, they were not convicted, were charged with felony littering, which is a law that is designed for toxic waste dumping, right? So the state decides what's underground and what's above ground, and it's not about being sexy or cool, although it can be, but both can be, and they need to really work together. An example of that, I think, is the famous example of the Black Panthers free breakfast program, which I think has been talked about a lot in recent years as the resurgence of mutual aid has happened. I think it's been really beautiful. People have really like focused on not the guys in the leather jackets, but instead these survival programs pending revolution, as they were called, and these really powerful and impactful mutual aid programs. And there was a famous quote from the FBI director saying that the free food programs for children was the most dangerous thing the Black Panthers were doing because they were building community power. So that's true. That's all real, but we can overcorrect on that a bit because they were funding feeding of the kids by robbing banks. And what I want to argue is that both those bank robberies and those meals for children were equally like simple and similar acts of mutual aid. One was underground, one was above ground, absolutely necessary to one another. Okay, so I'm going to talk about history as a way of opening up our eyes to some perspective on the present. And for an example that has been on my mind a lot recently, the Underground Railroad, I think, is a really important thing for us to study tactically in this moment, because it was a strategy based on a decentralized logistical movement of mutual aid of people and materials from states with very different levels of legal situation. So if you're talking about trans health or you're talking about abortion, obviously the state borders matter a lot. And so it becomes really important that we be able to bring HRT, bring puberty blockers and abortifacients into states where they have been made de facto illegal. And it's equally important that we be able to bring pregnant people, trans people, or anyone requiring reproductive care out of those states to receive care in a place where it's still available. And we do that in a way that's free and that does not jeopardize them legally, right? So we mostly hear about the Underground Railroad as like sort of white Quakers who had a fake door in their cellar and they hid maroons, and like that's true, that was part of it. But the vast majority of the Underground Railroad were Black militants, often organized in their local cities into what were called vigilance committees. And those were like local to a city which was north of the Mason-Dixon. And they would basically pass people along from one to the other. And those vigilance committees would also just like wait at ports or at like points of entry to the city and bring people in who looked like they had just walked off a plantation and walked 300 miles, right? They were stowed away on a ship. And they would take those people and they would house them, give them employment, give them food, connect them to missing kin. These were these incredibly powerful networks using only 1850s, 40s, 30s technology for communication. And they were often able to stop Black folks being sent back into the South. So the courts in the North would have 24-hour fugitive slave trials to try and like get them as fast as possible. And these vigilance committees could get whole mobs to take out the court and save the person from being sent back into slavery, right? So these vigilance committees are very similar to they're a mutual aid organization that we would have today in many ways. It's a small group, sometimes even just a handful, who maybe knows the people in the next city, both north and south, but doesn't actually have any control or administration of the entire network. And nevertheless was such an effective force of liberation that they freed 100,000 people and led to the crisis of the slave states that eventually led to emancipation and the Civil War and the Black Revolution, right? But I also want to just talk about the underground versus above ground thing, that it was a debate at the time. Frederick Douglass, picture here, he thought it was ridiculous to share the stories of how people got out. He thought any tactic that still worked should not be spoken about anywhere publicly where a slaver might hear it, right? And as a man of his principles, he never shared the method of his own escape. And so we will never know it. To this day, we do not know how Frederick Douglass escaped from the plantation, despite him being probably the most well-written about enslaved person from the era. So this is not an appeal to authority. I want to be clear. I'm not saying, well, if Fred said it, we got to do it. Because the book that you see here, the William Still Authentic Narratives, that was published by a Philadelphia Vigilance Committee in 1852 as a way of publicizing the Underground Railroad, right? So while I lean strategically towards Douglass's position a lot of times, I'm so grateful that book exists. Like, it's an incredible book. It's so important to thinking about how we get free in the present. So we don't know exactly what's going to work. The successful movements of the past were just as engaged in debate, experimentation, petty drama, and argument as we are, right? The folks in vigilant committees didn't know that their work was going to be a proximate cause for the end of slavery, but it was. So when we think about mutual aid at scale, we have to also think about the ways it's building networks of power that are not visible to us in our small networks, but that in aggregate become a movement that can overthrow the white supremacist regime, especially when it backs up street action. I'd love to also talk to you about Deep Care, this book here, which I think is really important, by Angela Hume, about the abortion underground that happened post-Roe. So during Roe, people who still gave illegal abortions. I'll talk about them in the breakout groups. I think that is the other thing that gives us a lot of lessons about how to provide trans, queer, and abortion care in this moment. But I do want to end with a quote from Harriet Tubman, the most famous conductor of the Underground Railroad. And I have it here. So In her 90s, she lived on a farm in Auburn. She was also a disabled, she was a severely disabled person. She's like an incredible icon. And sorry, I can't go off on that tangent. So a reporter's coming to visit her from the New York Herald Tribune. He came to interview her, and she, at the end of the interview, she asked him, "Do you like apples?" And on being assured that the young man liked apples, she asked, "Did you ever plant any apples?" When he confessed that he had not, "No," said the old woman, "but somebody else planted them. I liked apples when I was young, and I said, someday I'll plant apples myself for other young folks to eat. And I guess I did." So be like Harriet Tubman and plant apples.
Thank you, Vicky.